people are like worried about what somebody's doing, as if all these people don't do things themselves. I mean, chances
Exactly.
are pretty good they have sex or they masturbate
Yeah.
in their spare time.
Everybody looks at pornography, no matter how much
Yeah,
money you might. We have all at one time or another looked at it. You know?
right. I mean, as long as it's not creeping into your
Exactly. Yeah.
you're not at work doing these things in front of people who don't want them to happen in front of them, then you're probably okay, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a great believer in that. What you do in private, as long as it's legal-ish, as long as you do it in private, then I don't think the problem is. And as long as it's all between consenting adults, then no problem. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
So
but
this is Bob and this is Doc, and we're doing a conversation. We're gonna talk about Doc loves movies, and I know Doc through the Overnightscape. So Frank's Overnightscape universe. Can we call it that at this point? Now that everybody has their own universe, can Frank have the Overnightscape universe? Is that possible?
I think he's probably the only person I know who does.
Because that's what they're branding all these things as the various universes. So there
Right.
you go. I think we can call that the
Yeah, we're like
Overnightscape
the
universe.
MCU, you know.
And so yeah, I thought it'd be fun to have a chat, and we kind of jumped in the middle a little bit. Doc was just telling me about a person who had a horror site and got themselves in a little bit of hot water because they worked in childcare, and somebody's like, you can't. Those two things are incongruous and can't happen in the same world, apparently. So I didn't know that, but I mean everything happens at the same time. So
Yeah,
who
absolutely.
knows what's going on? But tell me, Doc, so if you had to say these are my films of interest, like if I like genre wise, or even not even genre, but maybe it goes across genres, how would you describe your film
Well,
intake?
probably the most basic description would be exploitation.
Hmm.
Generally lower budgeted films, but not always. That trade in genres that can range from horror through science fiction, crime, even crime. Occasionally, they do actually verge on pornography. Most exploitation does because I'm afraid nudity, sex, and nudity sells. So
Yeah, there you go.
that I'm afraid is a fact. As does violence. Sadly, it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and there's all sorts of subgenres. There's some I don't like so much. I don't like Nazi exploitation particularly. Film.
As far as them being the villain or them being the hero.
Well, Nazi exploitation basically films. There are a lot of them. They're set against the background of World War II. Often
World
you
War
have
II.
things like Ilsa. What was she called?
Oh,
Ilsa
She
the North.
Wolf.
Yeah, She-Wolf. She-Wolf of the
Yes,
S.
she will.
I really don't like that sort of thing
Yeah.
because, well, I'm old enough that I'm not old enough to remember World War II. Obviously, it ended sometime before I was born, but I grew up with relatives, my aunts,
Right.
uncles,
Yeah.
who had served in World War II, and that was just something that was off. And it is a particularly unpleasant thing. I think I just really don't think that concentration camps and genocide are a suitable subject for exploitation.
to put them as the backdrop of your film.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
some of the films themselves, they're quite interested in the background of making them. There was one made where all the Nazi concentration camp sets were actually the sets from Hogan's Heroes repurposed after the series ended, produced and bought them cheaply, along with a lot of German uniforms. And he made
right.
this. Uh, yeah,
That's that's bizarre. But the Hogan's Heroes is one of those bizarre
yeah,
tales in and of itself because of its history and twists and turns. Bing Crosby was the producer of Hogan's Heroes, which is kind of a weird tangent as well. If anybody remembers who Bing Crosby is, but yeah, to have a sitcom basically of World War II POWs is
Yeah,
just out, and at a time when at that time a lot of the viewing public would have been veterans.
they would have been POWs.
Yes, they would have been. They would have been
I
there.
always
Yeah,
think if you watch British war films in the 50s and 60s, one of the predominant subgenres is POW films
yeah.
because the British soldiers, because of Dunkirk and so many captured there,
Hmm.
that became the predominant war experience for a huge section of British
Right.
war veterans. That's what they
Yeah.
remember. And so
It,
they made films about it. So, yeah.
but isn't that interesting though? You would think that they would avoid that subject because it probably wasn't the best. I can't imagine that the Nazis were great hosts, even to the people that they weren't exterminating.
Well, so it depended really. I mean, the thing that meant that they weren't treated extremely badly at most
Mhm.
Allied countries of
Right.
all. Of
We
course,
won't kill you.
Yeah,
We'll just
there are a lot.
feed you a little bit.
Yeah, there are a lot of German POWs incarcerated in the UK and
Mm.
Canada, and they didn't want them to be mistreated, and so
Right.
it was quid pro quo. The Luftwaffe, in particular, they ran the POW camps for Allied airmen who'd been shot down.
Right.
And of course, there were a lot of Luftwaffe crewmen incarcerated in the UK after the Battle of Britain, and
Mm. Yeah.
weren't mistreated. They did not mistreat the British and American POWs. Soviet POWs, different matter. They didn't care about them because they were Slavs and therefore saw them as basically subhuman.
Right. Yeah. Hey, that's great.
We're losing
Well,
a bit from films, really. Um,
well, if people haven't figured it out, Doc is British and he lives in Great Britain. And so, I mean, even so, I had relatives, like great uncles who were in the World War II, right? And so forth. And we're still alive whenever I was little. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a different thing. And in America, we didn't suffer um, the same way that the British did, because if you watch the archives, you know everything got bombed, and
yeah,
it was decimated in some areas, and so we did not we got to experience. You can't have chocolate, and you guys had to hide in the underground. So yeah.
exactly. It's a key thing that British and American war films they reflect two different experiences of the war. So many of ours, there's POW camps, and also it's about the home front. It's about being stoic in the face of
Hmm.
this onslaught, which you couldn't do anything about if you're a civilian. You got bombed whether you liked it or not.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so convoys were being sunk. You didn't get food, or you didn't get bananas. Bananas became unknown in Britain during the war.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, to the US homeland wasn't under threat. That wasn't an experience. Their experience of World War II focuses more on them being victorious
Right.
because
We're winning. We're gonna
it's like
win.
shaky start with Kasserine Pass, but in North Africa. But then after that, it was generally sort of a more positive sort of experience. Well, to
Yeah.
the extent that any war can be positive, I mean,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, if you think about, movies as a business, movies made a lot of money, and so it was very positive
yeah,
in
absolutely.
that regard.
There are many, many good American war movies, but they do reflect a different perspective to British war movies. And if
Yeah.
you've ever seen German war movies, obviously they have a very different perspective. They're
Right.
very effective about why they followed the Nazi leadership for so long and all these moral questions. Japanese
Now,
war movies are interesting because a lot of them were made by the same people who made Godzilla films, and they have lots of miniature ships and things in them, and planes and these huge
mhm.
battles. It's, um,
That's interesting because I don't think that I've ever seen personally. I've ever seen a German or Japanese war movie.
they do turn up here every so often. The most schizophrenic are Italian war movies because
Yeah.
they they were on the wrong side for most of the war. So Italian war
Right.
movies are full of Italian actors pretending to be British or American. And the villains were always Germans, never the Italians. The Italians very rarely feature in their own war movies.
Interesting. Yeah, that's why we don't get that over here so much. You being in Europe, I think there's a little bit maybe more access over the years. And
Yeah,
now it would be, I suppose there should be access with streaming, but it's not. We're kind of past that
yeah,
date. And the goopy thing, what really hits me in the head when you mentioned that was the fact that um, I have a film degree, and I took a class on war movies,
ah,
and I was thinking back, and I'm like, I don't remember ever watching a foreign war movie. We watched British movies, we watched American movies, but I don't remember watching anything outside of that, unless, and I'm pretty sure this wasn't a Japanese movie. I watched a movie called Hiroshima Mon Amour.
oh yes, yeah,
I don't know if a Japanese made that or not. It's a very interesting movie
yeah. It's
about
French-made film movie.
French. Okay, yeah, but it was yeah. Well, maybe the Mon Amour would have gave it away to me. But the about the atomic, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and it's an extremely sad movie, right? But it's also quite artful, if that's possible. It was.
Yeah, you see, French different experience again with their war movies. They're all often about the resistance,
Right. Oh, right.
about
Yeah, exactly.
the
Why
guilt.
why wouldn't they're more
Yeah,
like American movies though, in a way,
yeah,
because they're the victors, right? They persevered.
eventually, but it's also about the guilt of occupation and the number of Frenchmen who collaborated, because there's the whole Vichy regime that
Yeah.
existed part of France. And yeah, they're very conflicted, the French, about the war as a result. Probably the best French war movie I ever saw was what translates into English as Army of the Shadows,
Mhm.
directed by Jean-Pierre Melville. And it's about the French resistance. And it's interesting because Melville, who became known for crime movies, actually was in the French resistance during the war. And so it's very insightful about what went on, and about how they spent so much of their time not fighting the Germans directly, but fighting French collaborators. And that
Oh
Greece
yeah.
collaborated with the Vichy regime. They spent so much of the time fighting against them rather than the actual Germans. And it's a fascinating film.
That's a lesson for today. I mean, we all you always spend more time fighting the
Yeah,
corruption in your own system than you ever do the enemy. Doesn't it seem that way?
absolutely. Yes, it's there.
Yeah.
The other thing Army of the Shadows does is often in more recent times, sort of post 1970. There's been a lot made in about they tried to show that there's this terrible rivalry between the communist resistance and the Gaullist resistance who followed General de Gaulle. And according to Melville, he was on the Gaullist side. He said, the fact is, well, the war was on, there wasn't, because they had a common enemy.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
you know, they were fighting the occupation, and it was,
The
it
enemy of
became
my enemy. Right.
yeah, yeah, they disagreed on politics, but hey, who doesn't? That was their attitude.
But that's okay. We got to get these Nazis. Yeah,
Exactly. That's what they agreed on.
that's wild though. But I mean, that's an interesting thing that's happened with all that, because yeah, I know they, historically, at least in Japan, after the war ended finally, there was a huge push to industrialize Japan, right? I mean, it was a Herculean effort to get them, being in the manufacturing and everything, and of course that had to do with films, because yeah, Godzilla was it 1959? I think is the original Godzilla.
Even earlier than that, I think about 55, wasn't it? The first.
55 maybe. Okay. And I mean, and so yeah, I mean, they had to do stuff before that, but I'm just saying that there obviously was a push to have them have their own film industry as well, as part
Popular
of that rebuilding.
And of course, Godzilla was in part symbolic
Yeah.
of
Well, nuclear.
unleashing
Yeah.
nuclear.
Yeah, they've kind of got away from that, I think, in the newer
Yeah,
iterations of things. But yeah, back
well,
when it first came out, yeah, that was the
yeah,
big thing was we
there are
irradiated the lizard, and there you go. So,
there are interesting subjects in the kaiju films. Apparently, Mothra, the giant moth, if
mhm.
you apparently that is part of the beginning of a reassertion of Japanese traditional values within the context of the film. There's a
Mhm.
whole subtext there about how Japan needs to reassert its values in the face of this Western occupation, because there was a fear that Western culture was overtaking Japan completely, and they
Yeah.
would forget their own culture. And in Mothra, Mothra is an interesting because there's this fictional country who are trying to exploit Mothra, and it's obviously meant to be the United States, but they can't call it that. But
I
by
don't.
extension, it's just the United States. It's the whole of the West and Western culture it represents, and how they're not inherently bad, but their their values clash sometimes
Mhm.
with Japanese values. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Do you remember the name of it, or they just never said the country?
I can't remember what they called it, but yeah, it was so clearly meant to be America.
Yeah,
Uh,
because I remember watching Mothra. I've watched it more, you know, a lot of times when I was younger and not thinking about all this stuff. I don't remember. I haven't watched it probably as a an adult, but they I mean those were always I love those type of movies, right? The monster movie was what we would call it here, and they would have it on. The funny thing for me, at least, they'd have it on the weekends, right, at night after the
yeah,
news. But where I lived, they had this thing called the early show, which was on after school, and they would play monster movies. And so I saw a lot of the monster movies after school. You'd come home from school, you could watch, King Kong, Godzilla, Monster Zero, all that kind of stuff after school because they had to fill that time till the news came on. And so, yeah, it was a slightly different. It was weird to have it on in the afternoon, but it happened. For I
yeah,
think for the country, you know what I mean. I think in the U.S., monster movies were on late at night, but not in the market that I was in.
yeah. I think over here, monster movies were usually considered okay for kids to see.
Right. Yeah. They were all rated G, even though everybody
Yeah,
was getting killed, but that's okay.
yeah, but horror films had to be shown later
Right.
because
Yeah.
formative influence on me. BBC Two in the 70s and wow, way beyond the 70s, must be the 80s, 90s, used to run on Saturday nights during the summer, the horror double bill, where they would pair up these old horror movies. And that's where I got through most of the Hammer films, most of the Universal films, and sundry other sort of horror movies from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was
Mhm.
an education for me. It really was.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I grew up with the Hammer films as well, late at night, and I don't know. I'm trying to think. They weren't Hammer, but all the Edgar Allan Poe movies. I don't
Oh,
think those were.
yeah, Corman's, yeah,
Yeah.
they were part of the mix we had in horror double bill. They were fun, and
Yeah. Vincent Price and Pit and the Pendulum and all that good kind of stuff. Now would they? You mentioned earlier you were into exploitation. I mean, would they fall into the
oh,
exploitation genre
very
or
much so.
rapper very much?
Yeah, when they're made by American International, one of the primary forces in exploitation
Mhm.
of film.
The funny thing, they did nature movies as well, which is the
Yeah,
funny thing. They did a
so
bunch of nature movies. Yeah,
the main business was based on churning out really quickly films they could cheap films they could pair into double bills, and they
yeah,
might be horror, there might be science, or there might be teen movies, hot rod movies, surf movies. Remember
yeah.
those? The
Oh yeah.
party. You know, and they used to
Oh
bang
yeah.
them out on double bills because that way you got all of the revenue from the program. If
Mhm.
you had your own double bill, Hammer followed suit. In the UK, Hammer films used to go out on double bills. They used to produce them as double bills.
Mhm.
And Yeah, and of course with the Edgar Allan Poes in particular, of course, it's Roger Corman directing them,
Right.
producing.
Yeah. Hmm.
And he was the king of exploitation. I mean, lately I've watched a lot of films from his later company, New World.
Right. Yeah. New World Cinema. Right.
Yeah, oh, they're magnificent in their cheapness and actually their entertainment value. They know not to run over 90 minutes. Most run about 80 minutes. They know
Right.
not to go beyond that. And they throw everything into them.
So,
And he always
have you seen the Fantastic Four version from Corman from that?
only in
Yeah.
part. Yeah, that was to keep the copyright on
Right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it was so funny. I mean, it never got released officially, I don't think, but
No, no,
the internet has a way, right? So,
absolutely, yeah. No, I mean lately, I've seen quite a few of the Corman produced, New World produced nurse movies. You know, the young nurses, Candy Strike nurses.
okay.
They've all got titles like this, and they all
Uh,
concern like three girls who start a career as nurses and all. Like
mhm.
starting in a hospital, having qualified, and it throws everything. And you know, a bit of sex and nudity, some crime is
Yeah.
always in the crime subplot, medical subplots. Some of them made in the early 70s involved getting involved with black revolutionaries. Um,
Really,
it's,
I have never seen any of those, so I'm
oh, they're
clueless.
magnificent. They're worth looking for. And they did a parallel series about student teachers, which same formula, just set in a high school.
Yeah.
Um,
That's funny. Yeah, it used to be here we had, those would be like driving culture, right? So back
that's
in
right.
the yeah, even into the 80s. So I saw Star Wars at the drive-in, believe it or not, if you can believe,
Yeah,
Yeah, along with The Isle of Dr. Moreau, the old one from 77. And that
oh,
was the double feature at the drive-in. Um, and that time period ran into the 80s a bit, and then kind of driving culture here
yeah,
kind of died in the 80s, I would say, and that was when the rise of the multiplex for us, and you didn't really get that. Do you think, though, as far as exploitation picks and so forth, um, I guess I mean, they're not they're not quite the same as it was, because I think
yeah,
production values for everything are so much better, and
yeah,
you don't get the what I would call obvious exploitation movies that come out now. We have Quentin Tarantino is taking the exploitation movie and making it mainstream, right? So that's what we have now. I mean, Cocaine Bear, for Christ's sake, is an exploitation movie that's
it
not.
is.
It's mainstream.
I must admit, I surprised myself by enjoying Cocaine Bear when I saw it. I thought it was really terrible, and I really enjoyed it because, as you say, it's an exploitation film, and it follows all the rules of an exploitation film, and it doesn't take itself too seriously.
Right.
It's very, very enjoyable.
But do you think because of that they've kind of killed the exploitation,
Oh,
you know?
traditional exploitation,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, if you want to dig deep enough to the real crud, you can find the modern equivalent of those direct to, well, they used to be direct to DVD or direct to
Hmm.
video. Now they're direct to streaming movies. Look through the
Ah,
lower
yeah.
of Amazon Prime and things like that, and you will find some dreadful, dreadful crud. Some of it, I'm ashamed to say, made in the UK. Uh,
So
used to make,
I guess that's true. I didn't think about that, because um,
yeah,
they don't
they
describe, they don't take the moniker on. They don't take it anymore. They don't say, yeah,
exactly.
and be proud of it.
Yeah, they. I mean, I saw one. I can't even remember all the details. It had something to do with dinosaurs suddenly reappearing on, and it was shot in the UK. Well, it's actually shot in Northern Ireland.
I got a tax break.
Yeah, basically they got a grant to film it there. And
It wasn't Velociraptor or
oh no,
Velocipaster or
no, this
something.
this one was terrible. It was populated entirely by non-actors, directed by a non-director, as far as I can see, because he had no idea. And it uses CGI, so effects of the dinosaurs. So obviously they're better than they used to be. When you had some rubber glove puppet.
Right.
it's still really clunky CGI. And they
Yeah.
can't. The budget doesn't even run to having the right equipment for the soldiers who appear in it. I'm sorry, modern British soldiers do not carry what look like Winchester rifles.
That's what they had available.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I think somebody had a younger brother who still had a cowboy outfit, so I don't know. But it
That's
was,
funny.
it really was dreadful. Unfortunately, not so dreadful. It was entertaining. It was a real
Oh,
drag.
it wasn't so bad it was good. It was just so bad.
No, it's just so bad it was bad. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's typical of a strand of filmmaking we have now because streaming has such a voracious demand for content. And it doesn't matter whether it's any good or not. They'll
Yeah.
buy films off it. I mean, some get a cult following. I don't know if you ever come across it. It's another British film called Zombies Have Fallen.
I haven't seen that. I'm not a big
That's
zombie
not well
person,
known.
so
And that's just dreadful as well, because it starts off as one thing, then decides it's going to be a comedy towards some kind of serial comedy towards the end. Things happen for no reason at all, and it's just
the conversation in the background. We've been watching the dailies. I think you need to take a different tact.
again,
Maybe you could do this.
full of these non-act. Well, I'll be fair; they're probably into amateur dramatics, and because it's shot in the north of England, they've all got northern accents. I'm a southerner, so to me, it just always sounds more than ludicrous. People going around, Bayek or whatever, there's a zombie. No.
So, have you caught any good ones on the streaming that here recently that you would say, you know what, this is worth a look?
I caught a couple. I thought very entertaining. Last night, I finally caught up with The Arrival from 1979.
Oh,
which is one of those Italian films that was shot in the US with a mainly American cast.
Okay.
And it's absolutely insane. It's a film made by a madman, as far as I can see. It's fascinating because it's obviously quite a good budget, but it takes all of these ideas from other films that had recently been successful. They clearly they thought, Star Wars has been successful. We need a science fiction thing. The Exorcist was popular. Omen was popular. And there's even a scene which seems to refer to the Hall of Mirrors scene in the Orson Welles film, Woman from Shanghai, Lady from Shanghai. There's a touch of the birds at the end. But they recast all in science fiction terms. So, there's this dude played by an uncredited Franco Nero, who appears to be some kind of cosmic Jesus. I mean, looking after these bald children on a far-off planet. And anyway, his emissary to Earth to try and round up the offspring of this evil entity who died thousands of years ago and is continually trying to resurrect him. So he sends this entity, the Visitor, played by John Huston, who was...
John Huston getting a payday right there.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it's and he there's this little girl who is the latest. She has telekinetic powers, like Carrie, another recent popular release, and she's been dominated by her evil side. And but funnily enough, the little girl playing her, she actually does the evil bit quite well, but it's all undercut. Certainly for a UK view, the fact she has the sweetest Georgia accent because it's filmed in Atlanta, and she has this really sweet Georgia accent. Really evil with an accent like that when you talk like that.
Hey y'all, what are you doing?
It's like that. It's threatening.
That's funny.
She calls a detective. To try and get rid of him, she said, "You're a child." I can't do that. You're a child molester. But the way she says it is one, But
you, sir, are a child molester.
And it's recognizable actors who come and go. They've obviously only been signed on for a few. Glenn Ford is the detective and then gets killed off very quickly.
Or he quit. Yeah.
Mel Ferrer's in it. Lance Henriksen. is in most of the
Really?
film. Yeah, and he actually reckons it was the worst film he ever made. And he and the rest of the cast only signed up because the studio work was done in Italy and they got a free trip to Italy. But that was his. Shelley
I
Winters.
I love that so many times. You know, Michael Caine, I think, has said something the same way for Jaws 4. He's like, well, I got to go stay in the Bahamas for, 2 months for free. And so many actors will be, at some point in their career, like, well, they paid me and I got to go to,
Yeah.
wherever.
Well, I remember, what's his name? David Warbeck, British actor.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually a New Zealander, but he lived in the UK. If you watch Italian films in the 70s, you'll know him because he became a huge star in Italy in exploitation films.
Mm-hmm.
And he always said it wasn't the money. He actually made, because he also used to be a male model for clothes catalogs. And he said he made more money from the modeling than he ever did from these films. He said, but the thing was that he and his wife, he took his wife with him, and they used to get like these free holidays in Italy while they're being shot. And sometimes even more exotic locations he'd go to. He said that's why he kept doing them.
It's like free vacations. Yeah.
Yeah, he said that was the brilliant thing. They were always fun to make. Yeah.
That's wild. And it happens over and over and over again. But I think back to this idea of the streaming thing with where exploitation has kind of landed, gone from being, called exploitation to being drive-in fare to being VHS, straight to video, DVD, and now what we call the long tail of streaming. It's interesting how it keeps following, right? But I don't think, straight to video. Funnily enough, I worked at a video store in the heyday of video rental, and straight to video was the bad word, right? Well, that's a straight to video. You don't want that, but people would rent them. I literally watched people come in. You could only rent 7. Think about now it's not that big a deal because you have it streaming to your house, but you could rent 7 movies was the maximum. And I don't know how many people would come in and rent 7 movies, and they're like in the video store walking around, and they'd be like, well, we got 6, we want to get 1 more. Oh, well, I think, okay, well, there's this movie called The Lift, which is a British movie that I don't think is very good. It's about some killer elevator, and it got rented out every week because people. What's that?
It was a Dutch movie that was remade in the US.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I just remember because I just knew it from the title being called The Lift, but people would rent it, and I'm like, to me, that was kind of like you're on the bottom rung at this point with your rentals when you're grabbing the lift because we have 5 copies of it.
That's directed by Dick Maas,
you're a fan now. I feel bad by saying that.
No, Dick Maas is fascinating. I've got some of his films on DVD. Actually, he has directed. He's based in obviously the Netherlands, and he has directed some truly wild exploitation, what we would call exploitation films there, and they are quite bonkers. A lot of them.
So you haven't seen The Lift, or you have? I'm wondering.
I have actually. I think I have. It's been a long time since I've seen it. It's very low budget, obviously, because it uses this very small location, limited location. But the lead actor, and I can't remember his name, but he was in a lot of Dick Maas films, and he's best known as Amsterdam, with the same leading man, about a serial killer frogman in the canals of Amsterdam, and that is an insane film.
Well, they couldn't convince him to throw the bikes back up onto the parkway or anything.
The ending feels quite arbitrary. Well, it was this guy, really? This guy we've never met before, And it's the English language version is dubbed with Dutch actors who could speak English, but with these really thick accents. And there's this bit with the mayor of Amsterdam is complaining, there's a serial killer, loose from the canal. It's like from a bad British war movie, you know. I mean, it's and
That's
it's.
funny.
I tell you, the lead cop in it, he really should have been prosecuted by Child Services. He's a single father to a 13-year-old girl who he leaves at home on her own so often, and most of the time she keeps going. She has this sort of nerdy male school friend who, unfortunately, has been dubbed with an actor who sounds 30 years old. And so, stay away from him. Stay away from him. He's a pedo, and he's a pedophile in disguise. You know, you hear
Amy,
about
where's your dad at tonight, Amy?
oh my god! You know?
That's wild, but it's fascinating that all the kind of the transition, because it seems like it's a harder transition or a more frequent transition than the mainstream has had. So they've really had to kind of fight for space, as it were, because each one of their outlets have been shorter lived, perhaps.
Mm. Well, this is it. Direct to video, interestingly. I'm not going to make the claim it's a British invention, but one of the first people, certainly in the UK, to ever make films specifically for release on video was a guy called Cliff Twemlow, who, to those of us who love exploitation films, is something of a hero. Died some years ago, but he was from Manchester. And basically, he built up his own tiny empire of incredibly low budget filmmaking. He had this group of people he worked with. And anyway, he was very forward thinking, and he saw video was coming in, and he thought, what someone needs to do is to make films, because the demand for films is going to be great. And of course, first of all, the big studios and distributors didn't want to release their films onto VHS.
Right. Oh, there was a big fight. I was during that time where a video would, if you had, so the video store, everybody always wondered, the video store would buy a video, it would be like $80 to $120 for one copy.
Yeah.
And then during my time there, it went from that, and then they finally relented to where you were buying them for, $15, $20 off the shelf.
Yeah. So Cliff Twemlow, this guy, he produced this film made in Manchester. It's a gangster movie for direct-to-video release. Because, as he said, the people who rent these and want to watch them, as he figured, were people who've just come home from the pub with their mates.
Yeah.
They've got a curry they're going to eat at home. Watch on the telling, and so he produced these films which catered to this. And actually, I have to say, they show the lack of resources, but they're surprisingly well made, bearing in mind that they have budgets like a 50 pence. It's, he was actually quite a charismatic leading man in them, and it was they're very enjoyable films, the Cliff Twemlow films. But he was very much ahead of his time, because he also experimented in releasing films directly on computer, and that was one of the last things he did before he died. He experimented with that, so he was way ahead of anybody else doing that. So,
right, yeah, way ahead of the streaming wave that we're
in
the middle of.
Yeah. He was a very interesting guy. He was actually a nightclub bouncer at one time who parlayed into being an extra in films, and that's where he made contacts in the filmmaking business. And he's quite a character.
That's interesting. So if you had to name, kind of the top 5 exploitation, creators, I mean, we talked about Roger Corman and you talked about some others. Who would you name them? Who would they be?
Well, there's obviously people like Roger Corman. Really, you've got
to some more obscure ones, perhaps.
You've got to look to the continent for some of the best. Jesus Franco. You can't go wrong with a Jesus Franco directed film, and he directed hundreds of films, literally. Most of them are terrible, but
most of them are terrible.
There are some are just brilliant, and I mean his And again, he went across all genres, and he threw everything. You'd always guarantee there'd usually be some nudity, there'd usually be some sex, there'd be violence, there'd be horror. He'd throw it all in. And I mean, his Dracula, Prisoner of Frankenstein, verges on being hallucinogenic. It's just so bizarre. I mean,
That's interesting.
but he also made a film. It's called Venus and Furs, although has very little to do with the novel, that title. But that is quite brilliant. It's almost an arty exploitation film, and that is quite brilliant to watch. And and this is the thing about Franco. When he took more time over his films, because Venus and Furs was a pet project, the result was always very, very good, very, very intriguing and watchable. And there's Jesus Franco, Lucio Fulci from Italy. Oh, another one. What was it? He's infamous for, in the States it's called Zombie 2. Zombie Flesh Eaters, we call it in the UK, which was an unofficial sequel, of course, to Dawn of the Dead.
Okay.
Whatsoever. And it's set mainly on an island. But Fulci was the master of gore films, but also sometimes directed far subtler. But he directed in every genre imaginable in Italy before he wound up with horror. He used to direct comedy films, spaghetti westerns, and then he got drawn into horror. And he just turned out The Beyond's another good one of his. That's with David Warbeck, and that's quite something. The Beyond. Strange goings on in a Louisiana hotel. Although you could tell it wasn't actually filmed in Louisiana because all the signs they're supposed to be in English, but it's obviously painted in Italian. Stagehand who didn't speak English because the spellings are way off.
Right.
Lucio Fulci, Jesus Franco. I'm trying to think of the trouble is that a lot of them hide behind pseudonyms on their films, because in Italy particularly there's a stigma attached to home produced low budget films, so they used to anglicize their names so to try and fool people into thinking they're watching an American or British film. And there used to be a lot of them would be set in the UK or sometimes actually filmed here. But it'd be like Ricardo Freda, who sometimes billed as Robert Hampton. If I remember rightly, he directed Tragic Ceremony, which again is absolutely borders on surrealism at some points. And it's supposedly set in the UK, but if you're from the UK, it is so obviously filmed in Spain. And all the cars are left-hand drive for one thing. And, the details, but it is quite bizarre. It really is. I mean, it just builds this absolutely weird conclusion. And it stars Camille Keaton, who is most infamous now for being in I Spit on Your Grave.
Okay. I know that one. I don't know if I've actually seen all of it, but I do know that one.
Yeah. Tragic Ceremony is interesting because it was never released in English, but there's now a subtitled version. But I think Tubi have got it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Tubi seems to have a lot. Their catalog is very, very deep.
I've caught up with a lot of Jesus Franco films there lately. So there's Ricardo Freda, another sort of Italian. Oh, of course. How could I not mention him? Paul Naschy, Spanish horror star. In Spain, Paul Naschy was what, I don't know, Boris Karloff was to the English-speaking world. He was amazing from the late 60s onwards. He loved horror films. He loved Universal films. He loved Hammer films. And so he made his own equivalents in Spain. And they were magnificent. His usual character was a Polish werewolf called Waldemar Daniński, who...
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, and films are magnificent. He gets to battle like the witch women and the Yeti in one film he battles. It's they're amazing films. And he didn't just play Daninsky; he also played Dracula in one film. He can't remember if he played Frankenstein's once. He played a mummy, I think, in one film. Rightly, yes, he did. And yeah, they're magnificent films. They're very Spanish. They're very much era, but they're wild and insane, absolutely insane films. Yeah, he used to write them under his real name, Jacinto Molina. Jacinto Molina. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I don't speak Spanish. So. Yeah, he was known as Paul Naschy. And funny enough, in his later years, he became known as a very respectable character actor in Spain. And he made these fantastic, wrote and starred in these fantastic movies, which are prime exploitation. They are just like they are like the Universal movie, with things like House of Frankenstein and things like that, but shot in color with Hammer style sex and gore in them. It's wild to watch. I mean, yeah. Oh, that was one of my favorites, Dr. Jekyll and the Wolfman. Where
just sticking two together, right? So we'll just say, oh, we'll just say vampire. Yeah.
He comes to London and bumps into like the great grandson of Dr. Jekyll, who's still experimenting and experiments on the Wolfman and injects him with a serum. And he alternates between being normal Valdemar, the Wolfman, and Mr. Hyde. It's
okay.
I
like that. That was a good meeting there. What can we do? We can do three things. There you go.
Yeah, there's a scene where he's Mr. Hyde. He runs around Piccadilly Circus with people looking out at him. Who is this freaking lunatic? Because apparently they filmed it. They didn't tell anyone they were filming there. They just shot it.
So they guerrilla style. They just went out with the camera and went for it.
I remember seeing an interview with one of his sons who was there when he shot. He said, we just saw all these people looking, thinking some crazy Spanish guy running around.
That's funny. Well, I guess, that's the way you save money. You don't get permits.
Yeah. It's notoriously difficult to get a permit to film in London. And what was it? There was a Paul Naschy film. Vengeance of the Zombies. That's very widely available in an English version. That also was shot mainly in the UK. And that is amazing. He plays a triple role in it. And it's that is just wild. Absolutely. And it was the grooviest musical score, because it's made in the 70s. And it's absolutely wild, the stuff that goes on in it. It's, people having strange dreams involving Satan, played by Naschy. Or Naschy playing an Indian Swami or guru or whatever, and his evil twin brother. And it's, oh, God, it's just...
He saves on money. He doesn't have to hire anybody to play these
and, of course, there are zombies in it,
Yeah.
It has this fabulous battle between zombie women and British Scotland Yard detectives and whatever.
That's funny. I have to check it out. Goodness.
Yeah, but like all Spanish films in that period, they have this assumption that we like very bad wallpaper in the UK in our interior decor. Many Spanish films of the year, I've seen some people supposedly at somebody's office in Scotland Yard or something. They have the most garish wallpaper on the walls. I lived through that. I don't remember. In fact, wallpaper was going out of fashion in the UK. Very weird.
They're I guess either they had that available and they just shot it, or they're like, okay, this is the way the British look. This is the way it looks, guys.
I think we all got red hair as well. And,
really? Okay. I mean, that's...
Oh, yes. That's a trait you'll see in a lot of Italian films. English women are usually portrayed by red-haired Italian actresses. I don't know what they have this thing. They think that's what British women look like. They have red hair and blue eyes. Bearing in mind that my personal acquaintance with women, there's only one who fits that description out of all the women I know. And I'm not claiming lots, but there is one.
That's pretty uncommon, I think, really.
Italians in their films, they favour non-Italian. What we have a stereotype view of what Italian women look like. Olive skin, dark hair, dark eyes. In Italian films, they favour as their leading ladies fair-haired, blue-eyed women. That's their
really.
thing. And they also have that for leading men are often fair-haired and blue. Franco Nero, Gianno Gialli, Terence Hill, despite his name, is Italian. All fair-haired guys. Although in Terence Hill's case, or Mario Girotti, to give him his proper name, to be fair, he is half German. So,
there you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of someone else who was. What's he called? He's billed in English as Anthony M. Dawson. His name's got on my head. His real name. But anyway, very prolific Italian director who has directed in all genres. And again, if you see the name Anthony M. Dawson on a film as director, it's going to be a fun exploitation film, because he was one of those Italian directors in the 70s and into the 80s. They jumped on to the exploitation film bandwagon. They churned these films out. Often anything that had been popular in the States, they made imitations of, or their version of, their interpretation of it.
Right, yeah.
Wild. And Anthony M. Dawson, Antonio Margheriti, that's his real name. He was one of the most prolific directors of doing this. Like this week, hey, zombies are in the. Okay, I'll make a zombie film. Next is popular. Okay, I'll make a post-apocalyptic movie, and it was like that. And they're always fun. There's a as I say, it's the continent really since the 70s where the real hardcore of exploitation was done in that period. Now, of course, it's moved on to direct streaming and whatever, which can be made anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm surprised that there's not more in other places. We still haven't moved past the point of having kind of these hubs of entertainment creation. I'm surprised there's not, somewhere in Africa, they're not making movies because it's cheaper.
It's Nollywood, as it's known, African made, and usually Nigerian made exploitation films. They increasingly, I see examples of those, but they seem. I know people who are really into them, these Nollywood movies, but to me, because of the cultural difference, it just seems baffling. They seem baffling to me, often because there's just too much of a cultural difference in me. And I mean, I say that I know enough people of Nigerian descent, but it still seems baffling to me. Their films and their cinematic conventions, but yeah.
But they haven't. I would say that, but they're not like on what I would call the mainstream stage, I suppose, where other things didn't make it. So and these the Roger Cormans of the world made it into the mainstream stage, and so forth. And well, if you even think about it, Mad Max was an exploitation movie of some sort back then. It's made itself, for Australian cinema.
Absolutely, Ozploitation, as it was known at the time. There was a huge exploitation film industry in Australia at one time. I mean, again, Mad Max is the best known example of that. But there were so many others, which got churned out there. They even had a kung fu Australian crossover film called The Man from Hong Kong, which with a Hong Kong police agent who's an expert in kung fu, because aren't they all?
I think I've watched Man from Hong Kong, to be honest with you. I think I've recognized that title.
The fight sequences are fantastic, and of course it has George Lazenby, James Bond himself, as the villain, and he gets to have a kung fu fight with someone, and gets his arm set on fire. I remember him talking about that film once because he allegedly punched someone out while they were making it, And he claimed, first of all, he denied it, and then he said, "But if it did happen, it's because that bastard, he didn't warn me. He just set my arm on fire for the sequences."
That sounds. There's a George Lazenby documentary that I watched maybe a year or so ago on Netflix, I think it was. Anyway, it sounds very George Lazenby-esque.
Oh God, yeah.
It's a good documentary if you're interested. It talks a lot about his the kind of the crest. He became James Bond, and then he kind of threw it all away in a way
Oh,
because he could have made more, and he decided
good,
not
yeah.
to.
He had an
Yeah,
option to do Diamonds Are Forever, but
yeah, but he
yeah,
didn't. He gave it up. He
they
thought he
brought
was
Sean Connery back.
he thought he could make it without it, and then after
Yeah,
that kind of fell. So,
yeah,
well,
you can see in a few films, but he never reached the heights of
no,
being
not
Bond.
not the note of that. Yeah, that was the pinnacle
Well,
at that point.
he ended up he did at least one film for Al Adamson, another great exploitation director and producer you should look up. Um, I know I have friends who cannot stand Al Adamson films. They think they're dreadful. And I can understand why, but he fascinates me. He really does. He used to make a film and then he'd take it apart, basically. He'd release it under one title and film new
Uh-huh.
footage and re-edit it all together to make another film. And he'd keep
Oh,
on doing it.
well, that
And
he making more money that way. There you go.
yeah, and I did enjoy his Dracula versus Frankenstein,
Yeah.
despite the fact the guy playing Dracula was it his accountant or something? And anyway, it was yeah, it was surprisingly enjoyable. And there's a couple of others of his that I've enjoyed. But he had a bizarre life. He had a bizarre death. He went missing, and then he was found. Eventually, his body was found buried underneath the hot tub that had just been installed in his house. And it turned out he'd had a falling out with the plumber installing it, which he got out of hand, and the plumber had killed him, and in a panic buried the body under
Under the new hot tub.
Oh. You think, geez, Al Adams, he even had a bizarre death. I mean, he couldn't
That's
do
wild.
anything more. But yeah, it's the sort of thing you put in one of his films. But yeah, he's pretty good.
There
If
you
you like
go.
low budget, weird exploitation films, you can do a lot worse than watching Al Adamson films. He directed across several genres. Black Samurai was one of his, a black exploitation kung fu crossover, which is interesting to watch. Well, a kung fu black exploitation James Bond crossover.
Oh wow!
It has all those elements in it, and what's his name? Is it Fred Williamson in the lead?
Oh, Fred Williams. Oh yeah. Okay.
Another guaranteed you're going to get a good exploitation film with Fred Williamson's in it. Red the Hammer Williamson.
Red the Hammer, yeah. Actually, my co-host for the show that I do regularly, he met Fred Williamson.
Yeah,
yeah, at a autograph signing thing. Yeah, he said he was just as interesting in person as you would see him in the movies or anything.
Mentioning him brought to mind another bizarre, very bizarre, very weird film I saw and refused to watch again, called Whitefire, made in the 70s, because Fred Williamson's in it.
Yeah.
And it was shot in Turkey by an American director. And it stars Robert McGinty. Remember him? He was the exterminator.
Yeah.
The film, you can tell it's shot in Turkey because everybody has wild facial hair in it. But the plot, there's this really weird undertone in it. Robert McGinty, he has a sister, a younger sister in it, played by the British actress Belinda May, who some people remember she was in Delta and the Bannermen, a Doctor Who story. But it becomes clear, you just think that he makes when she's swimming naked in the pool in one scene, he starts making these comments to her. You think, Jesus Christ, he wants to bang his sister. And
that sounds about right.
And it's really creepy. And then her character is killed. And he finds, to carry out this scam, he finds a girl who looks like her, played by a different actress,
Mm-hmm.
and he then gets her to have plastic surgery, so she's back to being Belinda Main again. And of course, he then does have sex with her. And I think this is
Okay.
so. This really is. He's made her
That's
look like an image of his dead sister, who he wanted to bang anyway.
right.
And you know, I mean, then the plastic surgery job is amazing because obviously we've seen Belinda May naked in the film before. And I tell you, when she's done that, it's not just her face; it's the whole body looks
The
like
whole
everything.
body, yeah, everything.
It's absolutely amazing.
Well, you know, there you
I
go. Well,
won't.
Cher, she's all been
I,
redone from head to toe.
yeah, I just don't ever watch that film again because of the creepiness of the implied incest in it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just too much. It's an insane film in its own right. But to do a diamond robbery, a diamond mine, and oh, it's
Well, Doc, I hate to wrap it up, but maybe we should do this
well,
again.
well. I
And
think it's good. Yes.
unlike Frank, I'm not a 4 hour guy per
Oh, I
se.
agree. Yeah, I
But
agree. I try to keep my stuff down to a
I
minimum.
really appreciate you doing this, and we will. We need to do
Yeah.
another one of these because it's such fun to talk about,
Yes. Absolutely.
and we'll see where it goes from here. We went from war movies to Fred Williamson banging his sister.
Yeah. Well, Robert
That's a
McGinnis.
gambit right there.
Yeah.
All right, hold on just a second, Doc.